Hello, girls. I welcome you all to another lecture on the famous short story by Edgar Allan Poe called The Purloined Letter. In the last lecture, I'd given you a background on who exactly Edgar Allan Poe was, the works that he has already written, and the series in which this particular letter, the Purloined Letter, had been published. In this lecture, we are going to cover the text of the Purloined Letter, and I'll be doing the explanations simultaneously. So let us begin with the story. The Purloined Letter, written by the famous American short story writer Edgar Allan Poe. As we had discussed earlier, it was published in the year 1845 in a magazine called as The Gift. Now, the story opens with a Latin quote by Seneca, which we had also discussed in the last lecture, which literally translates to that there is nothing more hateful to wisdom than excessive cleverness or excessive cunningness. Now, Seneca, what he meant to say was that one should not underestimate the cleverness of the other person, because wisdom, uh, what the only thing which can equate with wisdom is cleverness. The story begins, and we see the narrator. The narrator over here is the aide of the detective as well, and he starts by saying, "At Paris, just after dark, one gusty evening in the autumn of 18, and you see that the age or the date or the year is not mentioned, so somewhere around in the 1800s, I was enjoying the twofold luxury of meditation and a meerschaum in the company of my friend C. Auguste Dupin, in his little back library or book closet or troisième number 33, Rue du Nord, Faubourg Saint Germain. Now, meerschaum is nothing but it is a kind of a tobacco pipe which is made from a very fine off-white mineral. And around 1723, meerschaum began replacing clay pipes, and it quickly became as prized as the perfect material for providing a cool, dry, and flavorful smoke. So it is nothing but a pipe which is used for smoking tobacco. And another interesting thing to note is that it is funny that Dupin smokes meerschaum because years later, when Arthur Conan Doyle, created his famous character of Sherlock Holmes, one of the trademarks or quirks of this particular character, Sherlock Holmes, that he too always is seen with his calabash meerschaum pipe. So that is one image which anybody will be able to visualize if we take the name of Sherlock Holmes, Holmes with a pipe. Now they were sitting at this particular place, Rue du Nord, Faubourg Saint Germain. For 1 hour at least, we had maintained a profound silence, while each, to any casual observer, might have seemed intently and exclusively occupied with the curling eddies of smoke that oppressed the atmosphere of the chamber. They were enjoying each other's company. For myself, however, I was mentally discussing certain topics which had formed matter for conversation between us at an earlier period of the evening. So the narrator here talks about or gives us a little bit of a kind of a reminder as to what other cases Dupin has already successfully solved. You must remember that Agassi Dupin features for the third time in this story, The Purloined Letter, and it was almost as a sort of a trilogy. The first two cases being the murder at the Rue Morgue, and the second one, the mystery of the murder of Mary Reject. So, even if it seems to appear as if the narrator of the story and the detective, C. Auguste Dupin, were sitting quietly, but these were the thoughts that preoccupied the mind of the narrator. The previous cases which Dupin had very effectively solved. The narrator says, I looked upon it, therefore, as something of a coincidence when the door of our apartment was thrown open and admitted our old acquaintance, Monsieur G. So, Monsieur G is nothing but Mr. G, and he was the prefect or the chief officer of the Parisian police, the police force of Paris. Now, Monsieur G had taken the help of Dupin in previous cases as well, and a new case had come up, and that is the reason why he had visited the narrator and Dupin at that address. We gave him a hearty welcome, for there was nearly half as much of the entertaining as of the contemptible about the man, and we had not seen him for several years. The narrator actually admits that the prefect was as entertaining as he was annoying, but they were old acquaintances, so both of them invite him in. We had been sitting in the dark, and Dupin now arose for the purpose of lighting a lamp, but sat down again without doing so, upon G's saying that he had called to consult us, or rather to ask the opinion of my friend about some official business which had occasioned a great deal of trouble. So, when this prefect, Monsieur G, comes in, Dupin had gotten up to light a candle. But when he announces or lets them know that he was there on official business, what Dupin does is that he extinguishes the light. And this is one of the queer practices of Dupin. And probably Dupin believed it was one of his fancies that good thinking is better done in the dark. So this is what he does. He puts out the light. The prefect explains what exactly the case was for which he had come for consultation. If it is any point requiring reflection, observed Dupin, as forbore to enkindle the wick, we shall examine it to better purpose in the dark. So he wanted the atmosphere to be dark so that he can focus more easily. That is another of your odd notions. This is something which the prefect finds to be odd, who had a fashion of calling everything odd or strange that was beyond his comprehension, and thus lived amid an absolute legion of oddities. So the prefect explains the case that he had come to them with, and it was also very odd, just like the odd characteristic of Dupin. And he thought that the case was so odd that it would interest Dupin. Very true, said Dupin, as he supplied his visitor with a pipe and rolled towards him a comfortable chair. And what is the difficulty now? I asked. Nothing more in the assassination way, I hope. So the previous cases had involved murders, and Dupin was concerned if this particular case also, was concerned with an assassination. Oh no, nothing of that nature. The fact is, the business is very simple indeed, and I make no doubt that we can manage it sufficiently well ourselves. But then I thought Dupin would like to hear the details of it because it is so excessively odd. Now, Monsieur G, what he does is that he does not accept that he had been unsuccessful at solving that particular crime. And he tells to Dupin that I wanted to consult you on it because I find it to be odd and probably it was a case which would interest him or pique his curiosity. Simple and odd. Why, yes, and not exactly that either. The fact is, we have all been a good deal puzzled because the affair is so simple and yet baffles us together. The prefect had come to Dupin because of his superior intellect. And when we think about Dupin turning off the light and trying to find a solution in the darkness, we find that he is completely unconventional from other people around him. He is not someone who follows a very straight, simple reason. He is known to be a poet and a mathematician, and his reason is one of indirection, of thinking through sensibility and intuition of darkness, right? So the case was very simple, and the prefect wanted a consultation from Dupin to solve it. And the affair was so simple, all out in the open, that it had baffled everybody, it had shocked everybody. Perhaps it is the very simplicity of the thing which puts you at fault, said my friend. So, Dupin probably thinks that they are overcomplicating things. Prefect is overcomplicating things. That is why he is unable to solve it. What nonsense do you talk? Replied the prefect, laughing heartily. The fact that the case was so simple that its resistance to solution had made the police very confused. Dupin very pointedly says that simplicity of the case was what was causing the police trouble. The prefect finds the idea very hilarious, and when he stops laughing, he agrees to tell them the situation if they swear secrecy. The prefect says, "Oh, good heavens, who ever heard of such an idea?" He actually finds the idea to be hilarious that simplicity was causing them trouble. But Dupin had a foresight, and he was quite correct in this. A little too self evident. Ha ha ha, roared our visitor, profoundly amused. "Oh, Dupin, you will be the death of me yet." "And what, after all, is the matter on hand?" I asked, so the narrator wanted to know about the case. "Why, I will tell you," replied the prefect, as he gave a long, steady, and contemplative puff, and settled himself in his chair. "I will tell you in a few words, but before I begin, let me caution you that this is an affair demanding the greatest secrecy." So he agrees to tell them the situation if they swear secrecy, and that I should most probably lose the position I now hold were it known that I confided it to anyone. So basically, he was risking his position by telling or confiding uh, to the narrator and Dupin as well. But since he was unable to solve it on his own, he required some consultation from the detective at hand. "Proceed," said I. "They agreed to secrecy." "Or not," said Dupin. So Dupin wants to give him a chance if he would like to, refrain from telling them the situation. But the prefect continues. "Well, then, I have received personal information from a very high quarter that a certain document of the last importance has been purloined from the royal apartments. The individual who had purloined is known. This beyond a doubt, he was seen to take it. It is known also that it remains in his possession." So, as I had given you the background of the Purloined letter, we know that a letter had been stolen from the boudoir of an important woman, and she knows and she had seen the person who had taken the letter right in front of her, but she finds herself unable to confront him because a third person, the husband of that woman, was also present in the same boudoir or chamber, and she did not want to attract attention to that letter because the letter was presumably from her lover she was having an affair with. And if that were to come out in the open, the case would have been very scandalous. So, this is what he talks about, that we know who the victim is, the person from whom the letter had been purloined or stolen, and we also know who exactly the thief is. But the problem was that they were still not able to find the stolen letter on that particular Minister D. "How is this known?" asked Dupin. "It is clearly inferred," replied the prefect, "from the nature of the document and from the non appearance of certain results which at once would arise from its passing out of the robber's possession. That is to say, from his employing it, as he must design in the end to employ it." Okay. So, what the prefect tells him that the person who had stolen the letter still had the possession of the letter, but the prefect or the Parisian police were unable to find it on him and implicate him. Right? The prefect also tells them that he knows the person that had stolen the letter still has it because of a certain lack of fallout that would definitely occur had the letter passed out of the robber's hands. He further says that the letter had the power to bring scandal to a certain person of high honor. This person of high honor is the lady or the woman from whose boudoir the letter was stolen, and gives the person with the letter great power. So, when the narrator tells him to be a little bit more explicit, be a little more explicit, he says, "Well, I may venture so far as to say that the paper gives its holder a certain power in a certain quarter, where such power is immensely valuable." The prefect was fond of the cant of diplomacy. Dupin still wanted clearer explanation. Still, I do not quite understand, said Dupin. The narrator tried to explain to Dupin once again. No. Well, the disclosure of the document to a third person who shall be nameless would bring in question the honor of a personage of most exalted station, and this fact gives the holder of the document an ascendancy over the illustrious personage whose honor and peace are so jeopardized. So, the third person over here in question is the husband of the woman from whose boudoir that letter had been stolen. She was a lady of importance, and because the person who had stolen the letter had the letter in his possession, that is the reason why he was trying to blackmail this lady of importance using that letter. But this ascendancy, I interposed, would depend upon the robber's knowledge of the loser's knowledge of the robber. Who would dare? What the narrator was trying to say is that the person who has stolen this letter has this power in his hand till the time the person whose letter was stolen knows that the person who had stolen the letter still has that letter, right? So, because the person whose letter was stolen knows that the thief still has the letter, that was the point which was giving Minister D such power over the woman whose letter had been stolen. Because she knew that Minister D was capable of producing the letter at a moment's notice to her husband, from whom she was trying to hide everything. The thief, said G, is the Minister D. So he puts it out in the open that we know who the thief is. That is Minister D, somebody who is not named, but only the initials are used, who dares all things, whose those unbecoming as well as those becoming of a man. So he is not a morally upright person, he is scrupulous and corrupt. The method of the theft was not less ingenious than bold. So it was bold and also it was very ingenious, very new, very original. Nobody had tried to do this ever before. The document in question, a letter to be frank, had been received by the personage robbed while alone in the royal boudoir. During its perusal, she was suddenly interrupted by the entrance of the other exalted personage, from whom especially it was her wish to conceal it. After a hurried and a vain endeavor to thrust it in a drawer, she was forced to place it, open as it was, upon a table. The address, however, was uppermost, and the contents thus unexposed. The letter escaped notice. At this juncture enters the Minister D. His lynx eye or keen eye immediately perceives the paper, recognizes the handwriting of the address, observes the confusion of the personage addressed, and fathoms a secret. After some business transactions, hurried through in his ordinary manner, he produces a letter of somewhat similar to the one in question, opens it, pretends to read it, and then places it in close juxtaposition to the other. Again, he converses for some 15 minutes upon the public affairs. At length, in taking leave, he takes also from the table the letter to which he had no claim. Its rightful owner saw, but of course dared not call attention to the act in the presence of the third personage who stood at her elbow very near to her. The minister decamped, leaving his own letter, one of no importance, upon the table. We'll go through this again. So, the prefect of the Parisian police explains the whole matter in detail. He tells Dupin and the narrator that they know the thief is Minister D, a person who is known to be bold, who is not a good person. He is cunning and shrewd and is also corrupt. He has all the qualities unbecoming of a man. The method that he had used to purloin that letter was very ingenious in nature, very original. Now, the document that had been purloined was a letter that had been received by the personage. So, it had been received by a lady of importance, a kind of a royal lady. and it had been robbed from her while alone in the royal boudoir or the royal chamber. During its perusal, she was suddenly interrupted. When she had received that letter and when she was going through the contents of the letter, she was interrupted by the entrance of other exalted personage. So while the woman was reading the letter that she had received, presumably by a man that she was having an affair with, what happens is that her husband comes into the royal boudoir or the royal chamber. The other exalted personage is the husband of the lady, from whom specially it was her wish to conceal. So she did not want that letter to be open in front of the husband, and she wanted to hide the letter from him. After a hurried and vain endeavor to thrust it in a drawer, so she tries to put it in a drawer, but she is unable to. What she ultimately ends up doing is that she is forced to place it open as it was upon a table, so that the husband does not, try to place any kind of doubt on her, does not doubt her for doing something fishy. What she does is that she places it openly upon a table. The address was on the upper side of the letter and the contents was unexposed. At this point, what happens is that this particular minister, Minister D, enters into the boudoir, and he had a very keen, lynx eye means a very keen and observant eye. He sees the letter and he recognizes the handwriting of the address. Once he sees the handwriting of the address and once he, observes the expressions and the confusion of the lady in question, he connects the dots and he is able to come to the conclusion that the letter was from a man with whom she was having an affair with. What the minister does is that after some business transactions, he produces a letter of his own, somewhat similar to the letter, and places it right next to the letter of the lady. He places it in close juxtaposition. Juxtaposition is just he places it next to the first letter. Then he again starts talking, having small talk for some 15 minutes upon public affairs. And while taking leave, what he does is that he takes the letter from the table to which he had no claim. So basically, he purloins or steals the letter of the lady and he leaves his own letter behind. Its rightful owner saw. So the woman in question had seen Minister D take her letter, but she could not raise an alarm because that would have called attention to the act and that would have drawn attention to the letter in question. Because her husband was present, in the presence of the third personage who stood at her elbow, her husband was standing just near her. The minister decamped, leaving his own letter, one of no importance, upon the table. So the minister very ingeniously switches the letter and he takes the letter of the lady and he leaves his own letter of no significance or importance on the table. Here then, said Dupin to me, you have precisely what you demand to make the ascendancy complete: the robber's knowledge of the loser's knowledge of the robber. So here Minister D has the upper hand because he knows that the woman or that royal lady knows that Minister D is the robber, and that gives him an upper hand and the ability to blackmail her using that letter, because the lady knows that the letter is in possession of the minister and he can produce it to the husband at a moment's notice, which would be very scandalous for her. Yes, replied the prefect, and the power thus attained has, for some months past, been wielded for political purposes to a very dangerous extent. So, using this letter, he was blackmailing her for his own political gains. The personage robbed is more thoroughly convinced every day of the necessity of reclaiming her letter. So, this particular personage from whom the letter had been robbed is the client of the story, and she wanted to reclaim or get her letter back. But this, of course, cannot be done openly. She cannot do it very openly because the husband would get to know. In fine, driven to despair, she had committed the matter to me. So she had come with the case to the prefect, and prefect now wanted a kind of a consultation from Dupin in order to solve this particular case. This brings us to the end of part 2 of this lecture on Purloined letter. Part 3 of the lecture will soon be followed.